Hello, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of our journey to uncover the truth about the West Memphis Three. If you thought the previous part was shocking, beware, because today we are going to delve into one of the darkest corners of the West Memphis community, where paranoia, fear, and rumors have turned a peaceful town into a battleground of prejudice and terror. Buckle up, make a cup of coffee, and join me as we explore the dark side of the story, Satanic Panic. The story begins after the night the three boys went missing and were found. If you thought the West Memphis community would grieve together and seek comfort, congratulations, you are wrong. The small town suddenly becomes a chaotic soup of fear and judgment. The narrator cracks a joke right from the start. If Hollywood says they know how to make drama, West Memphis proves that real life is much more terrifying, and of course, without CGI. At first, parents were so worried that they tried to protect their children, students were confused, and local police were, well, both confused and bewildered because the case had no clear clues. But what made things complicated was the invisible fear called Satanic Panic. This was the period when rumors about potential suspects tied to demons, satanic rituals, and distorted religious conspiracies began to spread faster than the speed of Wi-Fi in the United States at that time. The narrator interjected humorously. If you thought someone playing Dungeons and Dragons would be considered a suspect, well, congratulations, West Memphis has proven it to be true. This is no joke. The local police began to receive tremendous pressure from the community, the press, and local religious groups. Rumors of freaky or satanic behavior were everywhere, from grocery stores to post offices to coffee shops. Each rumor was a piece of the puzzle, where truth and paranoia intertwined. The narrator added a witty note. If you're thinking, well, it's just rumors, remember, the rumors in West Memphis at that time were more dangerous than a hurricane with 75 miles per hour winds. Against this backdrop, the three main suspects, local youths with unusual tastes, a different style of dress, and a touch of teenage rebellion, are quickly targeted by the community. Damian Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly Jr. are targeted simply because they look different. Damian has long hair, wears black, likes to read philosophy books, and plays metal music. Jason is quiet, reserved, and likes to draw. Jesse, a 17-year-old with a below-average IQ, is easily manipulated. The narrator interjects. If you're thinking, oh, they're just different kids, well, that's true, but in the West Memphis Panic, different is the crime. The suspects were convicted not on physical evidence, of which there was little, but on the testimony of one of the suspects, Jesse Miskelly Jr., who was easily led and confused by interrogation. At first, Jesse gave vague, even implausible details, but the police, public pressure, and satanic hysteria turned her testimony into decisive evidence. The narrator interjects with a sarcastic tone. If you think interrogation is easy, imagine this. You're 17, you're asked the same question over and over again, and finally, your testimony is used to convict. Pretty bad, huh? The community split into two camps. One believed the suspects were demons incarnate. The other began to doubt the authenticity of the evidence and testimony. The media exploited the Satanic Panic factor to the fullest, publishing a series of articles with sensational headlines, spreading the paranoia. The narrator chimed in, if you think the news is all about facts, in West Memphis in 1993, the news is drama, drama, and drama. Meanwhile, the families of the three suspects tried to protect their children, hired lawyers, and sought out psychologists to prove that Jesse was a manipulative person and that Damian and Jason were not involved in the crimes. However, public and community pressure created an extremely hostile environment. Investigators had to work while facing the fear that permeated the town, where every eye was suspicious. Every whisper had hidden meaning. Criminal behavior analysts later argued that the Satanic Panic created a wave of unjust blame, turning the three innocent teenagers into victims of society as a whole. They had to deal not only with law enforcement, but also with the pressure of a paranoid community, where any normal behavior could be seen as evidence of evil. The narrator interjected humorously. If you thought being paranoid was just a movie, West Memphis proves that real life is even more terrifying. Just having a taste for horror is enough to make you suspicious. Things got more tense as public hearings took place. The press crowded in, and the community gathered outside the courthouse, screaming, protesting, both grief-stricken and angry. Everything was accompanied by the creepy sounds of satanic rumors, pentagrams, metal music, demonic rituals. The whole town seemed to be immersed in an atmosphere of fear and terror, where reason and scientific evidence were all but forgotten. Meanwhile, the defense attorneys tried to prove that Jesse was mentally incompetent to understand the entire crime process and that Damien Jason had no involvement in the case. They hired forensic experts, psychologists, and used the most modern DNA analysis of the time. The narrator chimed in, "If you think lawyers just sit and read the law, imagine them fighting the evidence, fighting social hysteria, and dealing with the pressure of the press and television." It was nerve-wracking. By the end of this chapter, public sentiment and satanic panic reached their peak, setting the stage for a lengthy, complex, and dramatic trial. Every detail of the evidence, testimony, and public opinion is ready to take center stage in Chapter 2, where the analysis of the Satanic Panic, its social impact, and legal strategy will be peeled back layer by layer. The narrator ends the chapter with a humorous yet suspenseful tone, and that's when we realize, in this case, sometimes it's not the criminal but the paranoia that's the biggest culprit. Get ready for Part 2, where the drama. If you thought things would calm down after the night the three boys went missing, stop imagining it right now. West Memphis was like a boiling pot, and everyone wanted to throw in a few more ice cubes, or in other words, more rumors, gossip, and horror stories about satanic panic. From a moment the local police stepped into the case, they were faced with a special truth. The community, the media, and some religious groups had turned fear into evidence, while real evidence was almost absent. The narrator interjected jokingly, "If you think being a police officer is patrolling, catching thieves, and sipping coffee, then I'm sorry. In West Memphis in 1993, the police also had to be satanic ritual experts." The investigators are faced with a very complex situation. Not only is there a case of 3 murdered children, but also a town that is ruled by paranoia. Satanic panic, a psychosocial craze where any unusual behavior, from wearing black clothes, playing metal music, reading philosophy books, to drawing horror pictures, can be seen as a sign of evil. In this atmosphere, Damien Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly Jr. become easy targets. Jesse, with her limited intelligence and easy to lead, quickly becomes the focus of the interrogation. The narrator interjects, "Imagine being 17 years old, locked in an interrogation room, being asked the same question over and over again, and every word you say can be interpreted in the most bizarre way. Does it feel like being trapped in a horror game?" During the hearings, the defense tried to prove that Jesse was mentally incapable of understanding what he was saying. Damien and Jason, the other 2 friends, were targeted for their different looks and strange cultural interests. The community and press immediately spun stories of satanic rituals, pentagrams, and mysterious signals. Local newspapers picked up the story, and even national television programs began to cover the story with a pace more shocking than a horror movie. The narrator chimed in with humor. "If you think the press is just reporting the news," in West Memphis at that time, the press was the 24/7 horror director, and the community was the scared, screaming audience. In court, the police presented Jesse's testimony as key evidence. The details he provided, though vague and sometimes contradictory, were used to build a chilling narrative. The suspects were said to have performed satanic rituals before committing the crimes. Damien, Jason, and Jesse became demons in the eyes of the public. The narrator interjects, "If you're thinking, well, it's just a statement. Remember, in the panic of West Memphis, vague statements were more dangerous than a real knife." The suspects' families embarked on a journey to protect their children, hiring lawyers, psychologists, and forensic experts. They sought to prove that Jesse was vulnerable, that Damien and Jason had not participated in the crimes, and that there was no physical evidence directly accusing them. However, the pressure from the public and the community was too great. Every hearing, every trial was shrouded in a media storm, where every eye was scrutinized, every whisper had hidden meaning. In that context, Satanic Panic completely changed the way people viewed the case. Ordinary behaviors, such as wearing black, liking metal music, or reading philosophy books were distorted into evidence of the devil. The narrator joked, "If you think you're different, rest assured, in West Memphis, being different is a potential killer." The hearings were held in public, with the press, the community, and local religious groups gathering, shouting, and protesting. Details of satanic rituals, pentagrams, and other demonic rituals were woven in, heightening the horror and pressure on the court. Meanwhile, the defense struggled with shaky testimony, ambiguous evidence, and panic spreading throughout the town. The narrator interjects with humor. Imagine being a lawyer defending your client in court, in the media, and in Satanic Panic. Mind-boggling, right? And this is more terrifying than any horror movie Hollywood has ever made. Later analysis shows that Satanic Panic is a real, invisible killer. It turns innocent young people into double victims, both being punished and suffering psychological pressure from the entire community. Damien, Jason, and Jesse are framed in bizarre stories without any real evidence. The narrator interjects, "If you think that crime is only judged by the court in West Memphis, crime is judged by the whole town." Meanwhile, the lawyer continues to research documents, interview psychologists, and search for DNA evidence. However, all efforts are overshadowed by the fever of paranoia, sensational media, and pressure from the community. Every step must be careful. Every testimony, every detail can be twisted into evidence for Satanic Panic. At its climax, the community is increasingly divided. One side believes the suspects are demonic. The other begins to question the veracity of the testimony and evidence. The narrator interjects, "If you think everything is clear, prepare for a psychological storm. In West Memphis, the truth is buried in fear, and reason must fight to survive." At the end of this chapter, Satanic Panic reaches its climax, sending the case into tense legal twists. Damien, Jason, and Jesse face a formal trial, where testimony, flimsy physical evidence, public pressure, and rumors of satanic rituals will decide their fate. The narrator ends the chapter with a humorous but suspenseful tone, and that's when we imagine a cold morning in West Memphis, Arkansas, in 1994, when three teenagers, Damian Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly Jr., walked into the courthouse. The atmosphere was tense, filled with both excitement and fear, like walking into a circus with lawyers, police, and the public. The narrator chimed in, "If you think a trial is just listening to a judge read the law, sorry, in West Memphis, a trial is a horror show with flashbulbs from the press and the faces of the entire town watching." From the first moment, the courthouse became the center of panic. Hundreds of people gathered outside the courtroom, protesting, screaming, or simply watching the devil come out of the shadows. Damien, tall, long-haired, with a determined but tense gaze, followed Jesse, a 17-year-old boy who was easily led, flustered and red-eyed from the pressure, and Jason, whose stern but calm face tried to hide his fear. The narrator added a playful note. "If you're thinking just three boys, remember, in the eyes of the public at the time, they were a satanic coven, and it was all because of Satanic Panic." The trial opened with the police presenting their evidence. Jesse's testimony, vague and full of contradictions, was used as the centerpiece of the case. Jesse claimed that the group had performed satanic rituals, but after forensic analysis, many details turned out to be either imaginary or created by the pressure of interrogation. The narrator chimes in, "Imagine being 17 years old, being asked a dozen times, each time being interrogated like the most terrifying game of truth or dare. And if you don't get it right, well, good luck." The West Memphis community is not just an audience. They become judges. Every hearing, every frown, every sigh is noticed. The press constantly reports sensational stories, from Damien's pentagram drawing on his notebook to Jason's love of metal, all are distorted into evidence of evil. The narrator chimes in, "Here, if you read philosophy books or wear black, you qualify as a potential suspect." How fair is that? Meanwhile, Damien, Jason, and Jesse's defense attorneys, Lynn Sherwood and Dan Stidham, are fighting a two-pronged battle, proving the innocence of the three teens while fighting off the social panic that has swallowed up the real evidence. They bring in psychologists, anthropologists, and forensic pathologists to analyze Jesse's testimony, explaining that he is easily manipulated and that Damien and Jason were not involved in any rituals. The narrator cracks a joke. If you think being a lawyer is just saying, "Your Honor, Judge," in West Memphis, lawyers are also detectives, psychologists, and sometimes comedians to keep their clients' spirits up. The trials last for weeks, with every testimony, evidence, and event being meticulously analyzed. Damien, Jason, and Jesse are repeatedly questioned about trivial details, from whether they knew about satanic rituals to whether they had ever read books about the devil. Each answer is scrutinized, sometimes misinterpreted. The narrator interjects, "If you think it's safe to say 'I don't know' in West Memphis at the time, that answer could turn you into a child version of the devil." One of the most notable climaxes is when Jesse claims that the group participated in a satanic ritual in the woods. However, investigators discover that the boy was manipulated during the interrogation, and many of the details do not match up with reality. Damien and Jason deny all accusations, claiming they did not participate in any criminal acts. The narrator interjects humorously, "If this were a horror movie, Jesse would be the character who was planted to create a twist, Damien would be the cold hero, and Jason would be the steadfast companion. And public opinion would be the audience screaming nonstop." In addition, the pressure from public opinion and the media did not decrease. Every day, newspapers reported on the Satanic Panic, painting the three teenagers as real demons. Small details, from Damien drawing dark pictures, Jason liking heavy metal music, Jesse telling ghost stories, were all blown up into incriminating evidence. The narrator interjects, "In West Memphis, if you like Halloween or read Stephen King, then, congratulations, you could be a potential suspect too." In court, experts were invited to present on the Satanic Panic and its impact on the community. They explained that many people were easily led astray, and that public pressure could turn false testimony into evidence in the eyes of the court. But these explanations were not enough to stem the storm of public opinion, and judges still faced pressure from the community for quick justice. The narrator interjected, "In fact, if you were the judge at that time, you would have sighed and wondered, am I judging the truth or am I manipulating a media storm?" A key turning point comes when the defense attorney discovers that much of the physical evidence, including fingerprints, hair, and DNA samples, does not link Damien, Jason, or Jesse to the case at all. This gradually opens up hope that the truth will eventually prevail. However, Satanic Panic continues to attack public morale, increasing the pressure on the court and the attorneys. The narrator interjects with a playful tone, "If this were a board game, you'd just receive the Satanic Panic card, which would upset your entire strategic plan." The trial drags on, and each day is a psychological battle. Damien, Jason, and Jesse must keep their spirits up, facing horrifying accusations, while their lawyers relentlessly present evidence to prove their innocence. The narrator interjects with humor, "If you thought the trial was just about the law and evidence, congratulations. In West Memphis, it's also a game of mental survival." And then, after weeks, many trials, and a series of shocking testimonies, the Satanic Panic begins to lose its power. The community begins to realize that the evidence is indeed flimsy, and that the three teenagers may not have been involved in the crime. But the effects of this panic are still fresh in everyone's minds. The narrator interjects, "If you think it's over, prepare yourself, because Chapter 4 takes us into the final legal steps, where truth, justice, and public pressure will come head-to-head." Chapter 3 ends with Damien, Jason, and Jesse leaving the courtroom, eyes still filled with tension, but also hope. They know that the battle is not over, but for the first time, The truth is beginning to find a place in a town once completely dominated by satanic panic. The narrator closes the chapter with a suspenseful and humorous tone. And that's when we realize, in a panic, the truth is sometimes secondary. But as soon as the courtroom doors opened, the atmosphere exploded. Sighs, knocks on tables, and the piercing stares of the public permeated every corner. Damien Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly Jr. walked in with a balance of calm and tension, but the pressure was clearly on the three teenagers. The narrator chimed in, joking but full of suspense. If you thought entering a courtroom meant listening to a judge read the law, congratulations, you've just entered a horror theme park with VIP tickets for suspects only. At the start of the trial, the prosecutors rushed to present evidence, each detail exaggerated into evil evidence. They brought out small items, a pentagram Damien had drawn, Jason's favorite metal music, or Jesse's favorite ghost stories. The narrator interjects. You think reading Stephen King is harmless? In West Memphis, that's enough to make you a satanic suspect. But this is only the beginning. The defense quickly counterattacks, bringing in forensic experts, psychologists, and even anthropologists to explain that the evidence is completely irrelevant to the three boys' deaths. Damien is portrayed as a gentle person, Jason as a normal teenager, and Jesse, though easily led, has not participated in any criminal activity. The narrator interjects. If you're the lawyer here, you're not just a lawyer, you're a detective, a psychologist, and a comedian all at the same time. One of the climaxes comes when Jesse is confronted with questions about the details of his satanic rituals. The pressure leaves Jesse flustered, stuttering several times. Damien and Jason looked at each other intently, trying to keep the atmosphere calm. The narrator interjected. If this were a horror movie, Jesse would be the character twist, Damien would be the cold-hearted hero, and Jason would be the loyal companion. And the public? They would be the screaming audience. Meanwhile, the press and public opinion outside the courthouse continued to report sensational news. The images zoomed in, Damien with long hair, Jason in black, Jesse telling ghost stories. All became satanic evidence in the eyes of the community. The narrator interjected humorously. In West Memphis, if you love Halloween or read Stephen King, congratulations, you might be a potential suspect. The trial lasted for weeks. Each day, a tense battle of wits. The defense attorneys had to constantly analyze every testimony, every piece of evidence, and every physical evidence. They demonstrate that many of Jesse's statements were made under pressure and were easily manipulated. Damien and Jason repeatedly deny the accusations, asserting their innocence. The narrator interjects. If you think it's safe to say I don't know, sorry, in West Memphis at the time, that answer was enough to make you look like a childish version of the devil. The next highlight is when experts are invited to present on Satanic Panic, explaining how public opinion is swept up in panic and distorts the truth. These people point out that pressure from the community and the media can turn imaginary statements into evidence in the eyes of the court. But the pressure from public opinion has not abated. The narrator interjects. If you were the judge at that moment, you would have sighed and asked yourself, am I judging the truth or am I directing a media storm? The real climax comes when the defense attorney discovers that many of the physical evidence, fingerprints, hair, and DNA samples, do not match Damien, Jason, or Jesse. This changes the situation, opening up hope for the three teenagers. The narrator interjects. If this were a board game, you would have just been given the Satanic Panic card, and now you have to play it smart to win. Not only is the battle of wits in the courtroom, but the psychological pressure on Damien, Jason, and Jesse is also extremely stressful. They have to keep their cool under tricky questions, face the suspicious eyes of the public, and hear the horrifying accusations from the prosecutors. The narrator chimes in. If you thought the courtroom was all about law and evidence, congratulations, in West Memphis, it's a game of mental survival. The defense attorneys leave no stone unturned. They bring in experts to analyze Jesse's testimony, demonstrate that he's easily manipulated, and insist that Damien and Jason are completely unrelated. They also demonstrate that much of the suspected physical evidence was improperly collected or misinterpreted. The narrator chimes in. If this were an action movie, the defense attorneys would be the heroes who save the day, and the prosecutors would be the villains no one wants to see in real life. The pressure from the community is ever present. At every trial, reporters, police, and citizens follow every detail. Sensational news about the satanic suspect is everywhere. Damien, Jason, and Jesse are under pressure not only from the court, but also from the entire town, where all eyes are on them like knives. The narrator interjects. Imagine being 17 years old, with the whole world watching you, and every little thing you do can be misinterpreted. Your breath is evidence, right? As the trial progresses, the truth is revealed. Forensic experts prove that Jesse's testimony is unreliable. The physical evidence doesn't match, and there is no evidence that Damien and Jason were involved. Slowly, the satanic panic begins to lose its power. The narrator interjects. If you think it's over, don't rejoice just yet, because Chapter 5 brings us to the final climax, where justice, truth, and public pressure collide head-on. And you don't want to miss it. Chapter 4 ends with the three teenagers leaving the courthouse after a long day of trial, their eyes both tense and hopeful. The narrator concludes the chapter with suspense. And so, in the darkness of panic and rumor, the truth begins to creep in. But will justice be served? Stay tuned for Chapter 5, where all the mysteries are solved, all the climaxes are explosive, and you will witness the end of the West Memphis Three. The courtroom was almost silent, save for the sound of flipping papers and the soft tap of shoes on the wooden floor. Damien Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly Jr. sat across from the powerful prosecutors, but their eyes were no longer as tense as before. Instead, they were determined, like three teenagers preparing to enter the most decisive battle of their lives. The narrator added a playful note. If you thought the courtroom was a place where the law was the only thing that measured it, congratulations, in West Memphis right now, it's also an arena for mental survival and a reality show that's no less thrilling. The atmosphere was more tense than ever that day. The trial began with the appearance of forensic experts and investigators, who for the first time presented physical evidence, refuting any accusations based on satanic panic. DNA from the crime scene, fingerprints on items and clothing, and carefully analyzed hair samples all proved that Damien, Jason, and Jesse were not involved. The narrator interjects. If this were a detective movie, you'd have found the most important clue. Physical evidence that's real, not fictional. The defense attorneys used this opportunity to present the whole picture. Jesse was led astray during questioning. Damien is a good person. Jason is just a normal teenager living in the shadows of public opinion. Every detail is analyzed. Every testimony is compared to the physical evidence, and all indicate that the entire satanic panic-based accusation is baseless. The narrator interjects humorously. If you think this is all over quickly, I'm sorry, because the West Memphis courthouse has never been a place where one touch has never happened. The climax comes when the prosecutor is forced to confront the serious flaws in the investigation. Much evidence was collected incorrectly. Many witnesses gave conflicting testimony, and some evidence was even altered or misinterpreted. The narrator chimes in. If this were a board game, the prosecutor would have just drawn the legal trick card, while the defense attorney would have smiled at the real evidence card. The most nerve-wracking game of justice you've ever seen. The courtroom became more tense than ever when Damien stood up, looked straight at the prosecutor, and said the words that made the entire courtroom hold its breath. We did not commit the crime. We were satanic panic children who became victims of other people's paranoia. Jason and Jesse nodded, confirming Damien's words. The narrator interjects with a joke. If this were a horror movie, this would be the plot twist. The real bad guys are panic and prejudice, and the three teenagers are the real victims. As the tension reaches its peak, the forensic experts take turns presenting detailed analyses of the evidence. The location of the bodies, the marks on the bodies, and the items at the scene are not related to Damien, Jason, or Jesse. A detailed, step-by-step presentation that leaves the prosecutor speechless, with no way to refute. The narrator interjects. If you think science is just dry numbers in West Memphis, it is the ultimate weapon against panic and prejudice. Then, the courtroom witnesses one of the most tense moments. Jesse is asked about his previous details about satanic rituals. With the guidance and support of her lawyer, Jessie admits for the first time that her confession was the result of police pressure and lengthy interrogation. The narrator interjects. If you think it's easy to answer under pressure, imagine being 16 years old, standing in court, and every word you say could land you in prison for life. The pressure is no joke. Damien and Jason also present evidence that they had no chance of engaging in any criminal activity. They present diaries, schedules, and eyewitness accounts that confirm their locations at the time of the crimes. The narrator interjects. If you're wondering how a trio of teenagers were able to defend themselves during a global panic, the answer is smart lawyers, solid evidence, and a little luck. The pressure from outside remains, but in the courtroom, justice begins to take its place. Experts have shown that satanic panic has turned innocuous details into evidence of a crime, and that public opinion is being manipulated by sensationalist media. The narrator jokingly interjects. If this were a reality TV show, everyone outside the courtroom would be both an audience and an unfair judge, and in the end, the truth would be the star. After weeks of trial, the court finally came to a decision. The judge announced the initial results. The three teenagers were released on bail, the charges against them were reviewed and seriously reinvestigated. Damien, Jason, and Jesse walked out of the room trial with eyes that are both tired and relieved. The narrator interjects. If you think this is a happy ending, then congratulations. You have entered the moment when truth triumphs over panic, but the nightmare of a false investigation is not over yet. Chapter 5 ends with the three teenagers standing in front of the courthouse, looking out at the sunny sky, feeling free after months of wrongful conviction. The narrator emphasizes, in West Memphis, justice does not come easily, but when the light of truth shines, the innocent finally see the light of day. However, the journey is not over. There are many unanswered questions, many errors in the investigation that need to be cleared up, and the truth behind these mysteries is still waiting to be revealed. And of course, let's not forget the enticing invitation. If you want to know what really happened behind the scenes, the serious flaws in the investigation, and how these three teenagers may have been put in danger once again, watch Part 3, West Memphis 3, Flawed Investigation True Crime Documentary. Guaranteed to keep you glued to the screen because of the unexpected details, spectacular twists, and horrifying but extremely interesting truth.